ciphering classes, democracy. Of value is thy praise. 'Tis not the present only, the past is also stored in thee. Thou holdest not the venture of thyself alone, not of thy western continent alone. The resume entangled on thy keel ship is steady by thy spars. With thee time voyages in trust. The mystery shall sink or swim with thee. Student with good strong hand and wary eye, O helmsman, steer the strong hand and steer the strong hand and wary eye, steer the strong hand and wary eye, O helmsman, steer Venerable priestly Asia sails this day with thee, and royal feudal Europe sails with thee, with thee, with thee. Sail, sail thy best ship of democracy, of value is thy praise. 'Tis not the present only, the past is also stored in thee. Sail, sail thy best ship of democracy, of value is thy value is thy value is thy value is thy
Good morning. I'm Janelle Ashley, Vice President for Academic Affairs at SFA, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you this morning to join us in celebrating with this academic convocation the 75th anniversary year of the opening of Stephen F. Austin State University. On this eve of a new century, the 1998-99 academic year has been one of preparation and celebration on our campus. We began on September the 18th, 1998, with a birthday party. It was on that day in 1923 when the first students registered and began classes. They were in temporary quarters on Washington Square. These are public school buildings. It was today's date, 75 years ago, April 30th, 1924, when in an academic convocation, the State of Texas Board of Regents accepted the Austin building and the new campus. It is quite appropriate, therefore, that we mark this historic anniversary with an academic convocation, and you honor us with your presence. At this time, I would like to introduce the platform party. I shall ask each individual to stand as introduced and to remain standing until all are introduced in order that we might recognize them together. Beginning on my left and your right, Mr. Lynn Montes, SFA Board of Regents, Lufkin. Mrs. Patty Greer, Secretary of our Board of Regents from Nacogdoches. Mr. R.A. Brookshire, Vice Chair of our Board of Regents from Lufkin. Mr. Michael Enoch, SFA Board of Regents from Mont Belvieu. Mr. Jimmy Murphy, Chair of our Board of Regents from Houston. Mr. Ron Atkinson, SFA Board of Regents, Henderson. Mr. Murray Shaw, SFA Board of Regents, Austin. Dr. Thomas Calloway, Regents Professor, the Department of Physics and Astronomy. Dr. Mike Chang, Regents Professor, Arthur Temple College of Forestry. Dr. Jerry Holbert, Vice President for University Advancement. Dr. Miles McCall, Vice President for Alumni Affairs. Dr. James Stanley, Dean, College of Applied Arts and Sciences. Dr. Thomas Franks, Dean, College of Education. Dr. Richard Berry, Interim Dean, College of Fine Arts. Dr. Scott Beasley, Dean, Arthur Temple College of Forestry. Dr. James Spear, Dean, College of Liberal Arts. Dr. Thomas Atchison, Dean, College of Sciences and Mathematics. Dr. David Jeffrey, Associate Vice President for Graduate Programs and Research. Dr. Marlon Young, Dean, College of Business and Chair of our Convocation Committee. Dr. Dan Angel, President of Stephen F. Austin State University. The Honorable George H. Bush, 41st President of the United States of America. Thank you. Dr. Roland Smith, Vice President for Business Affairs. Dr. Baker Patillo, Vice President for University Affairs. Mrs. Sheila Dyer, our interpreter. As Dr. Angel introduces the podium, let's give these folks a big hand and let them sit down. As Dr. Angel approaches the podium, I call to your attention the medallion that he is wearing for the first time today. Professor James Snyder of our art department at Stephen F. Austin, who designed and crafted the SFA Regents Professor medallion, was commissioned for the 75th anniversary celebration to design and craft an SFA presidential medallion. This is the only one of its kind, and it shall remain in the office of the president to be worn for official university occasions. Dr. Dan Angel, 6th President of Stephen F. Austin State University.
The year was 1971. A new assistant professor at Albion College in Michigan. The governor of Michigan extended me an opportunity to be part of a delegation to visit the United Nations in New York City. The invitation came from a tall, 6'2" Texan who took us on tour personally and gave us a personal briefing. I left New York City being deeply impressed with the sincerity, and his earnestness. Fast forward to 1999. Again, I had the opportunity to feel like I had spent 3 hours with him personally. The place? College Station, the George Bush Memorial Museum and Library. If you haven't been there, you need to go. The facility is simply breathtaking. A living exhibit of the president's life and his career. You are treated to first-person descriptions of various activities as you would not know them. President Bush and his beloved wife, Barbara, share their lives with you on that tour. There are family photos that include Governor Jeb Bush of Florida and our own rising star, Governor George W. Bush. During the tour, there are shared moments which range from moments of personal reflection to significant events in the life of our nation. There are sad times shared, and there are times of laughter. One event that particularly impressed me on my tour concerned World War II. A young bomber pilot and his squad were ordered to attack a communications stronghold on the island of Chichijima. They executed their task on day one, but they experienced heavy flak. Then they got the news they had to go back the next day. As he flew his crew in the following morning, the plane was hit, but the courageous pilot knew that he had a duty to execute his mission. He flew low and he flew straight. He dropped his bombs and he headed back out to sea. Soon, his plane was in flames. He gave the order to the crew to bail out, and he bailed out himself. After struggling in the water, he was able to inflate a small raft, and for the next 2.5 hours, he drifted in that raft toward the island that he had just bombed, wondering what fate had in store for him. Wet, wrought with anxiety, his eyes soon focused on an approaching vessel. Would it be ours or theirs? Fortunately for the president, and fortunately for the United States of America, the vessel turned out to be American, the USS Fenback. And for his bravery, President Bush was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. After the war, he attended Yale University and graduated Phi Beta Kappa. Then he moved to Texas and took a job in the West Texas oil fields for $375 a month. Now, the astonishing thing about visiting the Bush Library and Museum is that it shows how much one man was able to accomplish. Think about it. No doubt we'd all be impressed if someone had served as a U.S. congressman, or had been an ambassador to China, or had been the ambassador to the United Nations, or had served as the director of the CIA. Any one of these achievements would have been a significant lifetime well spent. But our special guest today has done all 4 of those things and much, much more. He served as our vice president for 8 years, and he served very ably, honorably, and memorably in the highest office in the land. This young, brave fighter pilot of 1944 would later lead our nation to resounding victory in Desert Storm. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pride to introduce the highlight of our 75th anniversary, a man who will soon celebrate his own 75th anniversary, the 41st President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush. By the authority vested in me by the Stephen F. Austin State University Board of Regents, we hereby bestow upon you the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters.
Thank you all. Please be seated. Dr. Angel, thank you, sir, and everybody else on this convocation committee, honorary degree committee, and the rest of you guys just call me Dr. Bush. May I single out the marvelous choir, the orchestra, as they played Song of Democracy. You were great, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I'm delighted to be back in this part of our great state, back in Nacogdoches, and honored to receive this honorary degree from SFA, Stephen Austin University. I have great respect for this institution, and I have to say this is a wonderful way to cap what has already been a special week for the Bush family. Last night, Barbara had her big annual celebration for reading, or she would be here. But in a way, I'm glad she's not here, because I'm going through an identity crisis, and I married the most popular woman in the United States, and I needed that applause on my own without her messing it up. And then on Monday, we were up in Washington, where they named the CIA headquarters, the intelligence center, after me, and I considered it a true honor, particularly since I'm not dead yet. And I don't think it's, but here we are. I'm about to celebrate my 75th anniversary, and here we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of this wonderful institution. I want to salute the students, particularly the faculty that give so much to the forging of character, teaching of values here in this great institution. And in all seriousness, I wish Barbara could be here. If my wife of 54 years, 4 months, and 8 days were here, she would make some comment, because she goes to special pains to kind of critique out how I plan to celebrate my 75th birthday. We're doing, in conjunction with the MD Anderson Cancer Center, she and I are being honored, she on her birthday and me on my 75th. But prior to that, 2 days before that, I will make my final parachute jump. She's skeptical at best. The other one I made, Dr. Angel referred to one, which was under very serious conditions. The last one was a benign environment out in the sands of Yuma, Arizona. But Barbara was skeptical. I know she wanted the parachute to open, I'm certain of that. But when I landed there on the sands, I was pumped up. The adrenaline was flowing. It's like the Lady Jacks when they win a game or something. You get it all flowing in that adrenaline. And she said, I said to her as we landed, Bar, now what do you think? I had on a suit that made me look like Elvis Presley. It was all white and a helmet and everything. I said, what do you think? She looked at me and said, I haven't seen a free fall like that since the '92 election. So she had the last word. And this convocation reminds me of a similar event at Yale University. The speaker was a preeminent clergyman. And he had a captive audience like I do. And so he droned on, and he went on and on. He said, Y, Yale, Y is for youth. Gave him about 25 minutes on that one. A is for altruism, another 25 minutes. L is for loyalty, 35 minutes on that. And finally, E is for excellence, a merciful 15 minutes. And when he ended, a lot of the guys that had been sitting up here at the podium had sneaked away. And there was one kid praying. Speaker, having been a minister, was impressed with this, and he said to the kid, this is wonderful, young man, to see a man giving thanks to the Lord. Might I ask why? He said, "Yes, sir, I was giving thanks that I did not go to Stephen F. Austin State University." I am very pleased to be here. Let me make one thing clear to the students. This is not a lecture. I always hesitate when asked to give a lecture because I don't want to make the same mistake Socrates did. He gave a lot of philosopher, gave a lot of lectures, and they poisoned him. I asked Dr. Angel, very helpful, what to talk about. He said, talk about 20 minutes. So here I go. Here we go. I thought I would offer a few thoughts on the challenges that we continue to face around the world and the continued need for active, engaged, principled leadership. First, if I could leave you with one thought about the world as we know it today, it's that I'm an optimist about our future. And you might understandably ask, how could this be so? With countries like Japan and Korea and Brazil facing economic problems, Russia facing political problems and economic problems, the fermented political discord in places like Malaysia and Indonesia, hostilities, of course, taking place in the Balkans. How can a person be optimistic? How could I look at the world as it is and suggest to you that things are going to be better? Well, the answer is that at age 75, I've seen how we've gone from a world divided by the superpower conflict to a world that increasingly shares a common hope for the future. Indeed, during the course of the life of this great university, the world has come a long way. I would remind the students who are skeptical and is probably as concerned as I am about what's going on in the Balkans, that it wasn't long ago some of the generation before us were taught to hide under our desks to avoid nuclear fallout from a confrontation that might occur between the Soviet Union and the United States. Two superpowers armed to the teeth, staring across each other, any mistake drawing other countries, innocent countries, into some kind of a Holocaust. I am an optimist, and I have seen how far we've come, and that's not to suggest that securing the promise of peace and prosperity in this new era is going to be easy or require less sacrifice than during the Cold War. At the height of the Cold War, President Kennedy observed, and here's his quote, "The peace and freedom do not come cheap, and we are all destined, all of us here today," he said, "to live out our lives in uncertainty and challenge and peril." Well, I have to confess, I think that's every bit as true today. The superpower conflict and confrontation is behind us, and I don't believe it can be reconstructed. I don't believe there's a way in the world that the Soviet Union can be put back together, all those now independent countries coming back under a monolithic communistic yoke. It's not going to happen. And there is more freedom, but there's also more uncertainty, a lot of uncertainty in the world. And today there's more peace, if you look around the whole world, but also plenty of potential for instability. And if one thing is clear, it is that our work is not finished. Today, the geopolitical enemies we face is no longer the Soviet Union, but they're international terror. They are religious fanaticism, people killing one another in the name of God. They're the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the international narco-trafficking trade, and only our country, and I don't mean this chauvinistically if we have students from abroad here, but it's only the United States, blessed with our strong economy, blessed with peaceful borders, blessed with living between the Pacific and the Atlantic. It is only the United States that has the capability and the moral standing in the entire world to address these issues on a global scale, or in other words, to lead in all these areas. And to me, there is no choice about what our role should be in post-Cold War era. We should lead with principle. We should stay engaged in global affairs and work with our allies and set a clear direction. as to the kind of world we want to live in. And we should resist the siren's call of isolation and protection that we hear cropping up. There is a new, and I'd say unholy alliance, some in the Congress and somewheres across the country, by some on the far right in my own party, to some of the leaders and the labor unions and the Democratic Party that want to stand for protection and against almost in a quasi-isolationistic stance. And it concerns me enormously. It concerns me when President Clinton's request for fast-track authority to extend the benefits of NAFTA, free trade south of Mexico, was beaten back in the Congress, sending a signal to a lot of the world, well, we don't need free trade, fair trade anymore. We're going to kind of cope within ourselves. This doesn't mean all this appeal for U.S. leadership that I'm making that we want or need to be the world's policeman. Indeed, some people thought that's what I meant when I was talking about a new world order, and others thought I meant creating a one-world government, subordinating our sovereignty to the United Nations. I don't feel that way at all. That's not what I meant. What I meant, do mean, is that the sole remaining superpower, we have an obligation to help shape a more peaceful world in which freedom, democracy, and free markets are the norm. And since the implosion of the Soviet Union, concerned though we may be about the Balkans, we look around and we do see more democracies, and we do see more freedoms. And if we don't do it again, lead, no one else can. The Rough Rider, Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Much has been given to us, and much is rightly expected from us. And we have duties to others and duties to ourselves, and we can shirk neither." And just as it was in the 20th century, so too do I believe that American leadership is an absolutely indispensable ingredient for extending the promise of democracy and free markets into the 21st century. We should remember that our national symbol is an eagle. It's not an ostrich. It's simply not natural for us to pull back and stick our head in the sands and let somebody else do the leading and as we combat the problems I outlined before. The need for continued U.S. engagement in our world is one of the thoughts that I hope to share with students at our little school, the George Bush School of Government and Public Service, a master's program up at Texas A&M in conjunction with our library. It's a relatively modest program, but we have big hopes for what we want to accomplish there. And if we can do what some of you professors are doing, if we can help inculcate into a handful of students the idea that public service, in spite of the ugliness of the moment politically, if we can inculcate into a handful of those kids that public service is a noble calling, I honestly feel we will be doing the Lord's work. Above all, I want to share with those students my firm belief not only in the importance of American leadership, but the idea that public service is a noble calling. And we need good and decent people to get involved in our political system, because our system, our democracy, is only as good as the men and women who participate in it. And it's important that people, particularly young people, continue to take an interest in the world. And if they don't like the way things are going, I suggest they get involved and do something about it and not just sit around on the sidelines and whine and complain and criticize others. I believe there's a valuable lesson to be learned from one of Texas' greats, Sam Rayburn, political legend, who was one of the great congressional leaders of the 20th century. Mr. Sam grew to be a respected and powerful man in Washington, as we all know, but he came from humble beginnings. And as a boy, his father told him, "Character is all I have to offer you. Be a man." And the lesson there is character is important. Character is what remains. And you know, a funny thing is happening as I get older. I find that many of the simple truths that I learned from my mother and dad, seemed like 1,000 years ago, things that almost sound like cliches, still hold true. And I can tell you that they still guided me when I was President of the United States. And Mother would come out with things like, "Give the other guy credit." Well, that's a fundamental cliche. Don't brag about yourself. Mother used the word braggadocio. We had to look it up. It's bad. It's like bragging. We had to look it up and see what it meant, but we got the message. Don't always be talking about yourself. Delegate. Give somebody else a chance. Be fair, be honest, and when someone is hurting, lift them up and listen and help if you can. And then there was always, put something back. You're blessed, you're privileged. Put something back, gives to something else. That led me later on to come up with this idea of being one of 1,000 points of light, because there can be no definition of a successful life in America that does not include service to others. Mother taught us other verities, timeless truths that I think contribute to leadership. And like any mother, she didn't stop giving advice after I got to be vice president or president. Some of you probably heard me tell this, but it's true. After the first State of the Union message, she'd inculcated into us all these values, but after the first State of the Union message, we get back to the vice president's house, and the Navy guy running it says, "Your mother's calling, sir." So I get in there and "Yes, Mom." "George, I think it's lovely. I saw you sitting right behind President Reagan at the State of the Union message. This was wonderful." I said, "Mom, you've seen those things." "Yes, but I've never seen my own boy sitting there right so the whole country could see him." And I said, "Well," and then she goes like this, "But I noticed something." I said, "What'd you notice?" "I noticed that you were talking to Tip O'Neill when President Reagan was speaking to the nation." I said, "He started it," and he had. He had. The man had done it, and all those values. I never got away with, assigning blame was something she taught us to try not to do. The other thing she says, "Besides that, you ought to be smiling more sitting there." I said, "Mom, Reagan's talking about nuclear annihilation, and I'm supposed to be sitting there? Come on, give me a break." So her advice wasn't perfect, but like the fundamental truths that we learn from teachers, from coaches, from teammates, from a mentor at work, from one that cares to teach the charter school, the values I learned came together to underscore the importance of serving others. And when I became president, I tried to use the bully pulpit of the White House to encourage more Americans to get involved in solving the problems we face as a nation. We worked hard to make kinder the face of our country, gentler the face of the world. And if we're going to be involved in leadership, and as I've made the case that I think we should stay involved, we've got to have an underpinning of values for the leaders. Now out of politics, the only politics that viscerally interests me is the politics in our own family. I was up at a Republican function just this week. Barbara and I went up there, the largest fundraiser they've ever had, and one thing, and my heart wasn't in it. I was thrilled to be invited. I had a chance to thank people that helped propel me from the precincts from the East Coast to the West into being President of the United States, and that you can never, ever adequately say thanks, but my heart was not in it. The politics now that concerns that I viscerally feel about relates to two sons. One, the governor of the fourth biggest state in the nation, and one, the governor of our state, the second biggest state in the nation. And I can tell you this, I'll tell you kids this, being president was the highest, obviously the highest honor of my life, but on that November 3rd in '98, when my two boys were elected governor, it was the happiest day in my life. It was Thomas Jefferson who said, "There is a fullness of time when we should go and not occupy too long the high ground to which others have the right to advance." And that's the way Barbara and I view politics today. As I say, it was the greatest honor of my life, and Barbara's too, to reside in that majestic museum of a house that was also a home because of the way the people that run that place treat whoever is privileged to be present. After my predecessor, one of the predecessors and fellow Texans, LBJ, left the White House, he said he knew the time would come when I would look back on the majesty and the splendor of the presidency and find it hard to believe that I had actually been there. And Barbara and I were talking about the other day, and LBJ was exactly correct on that. The job, the office is so magnificent, and we held it in with such respect that today, 6 years later, we find it hard to believe that we had actually been there. But now, I'm back in private life, feeling like a spring colt, looking forward to whatever tomorrow holds, and I can honestly tell you that after all the high-level positions I've been privileged to hold, the three most important are the three that I've got left: a husband, a father, and a grandfather. And I would ask you, what in God's name could be better than that? Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. As we near the end of this academic convocation, I would like to thank each of you for joining us in celebrating the 75th anniversary year of the opening of Stephen F. Austin State University. You, President Bush, and every one of you in this room today have made this historic day even more significant by your presence. You are always welcome on our campus, and we encourage you to come often. Dr. Richard Berry will lead us now in the singing of the SFA school song, All Hail to SFA. You will find the words inside the back cover of your program, or you may follow the words on the screen. The academic recession will follow the singing of the school song and will serve as the conclusion for the ceremony. We ask that you remain in your seats until the faculty have recessed from the Coliseum floor. Will you please stand? Dr. Berry?
Well, what a great day for Stephen F. Austin. You all will recall last fall, in September, Governor Bush was here, and he was kind enough to put his handprints and his signature in cement as part of our 75th anniversary celebration. I guess secretly and now publicly,
we would be really thrilled in the future that if we ended up having the first father-son combination for President of the United States, that we would already... It's our pleasure today to have the President put his hands and signature in cement for Stephen F. Austin for our 71st anniversary.
Somebody here tell me how to do this? Just stick it in there?
You're gonna have his wedding ring on there.
Ready? No, we got it. Come out. Come on. Listen, I don't believe in double jeopardy. Twice, but I'm really pleased to be here. Very honored to be here. I'm sorry, as I alluded to, and I'm sorry Barbara is not there, not here with us today, but I would apologize for last night was her big celebration for reading, an annual event supporting her Foundation for Family Literacy, and she brings in authors from all around the country, and they finished that last night, so she took them up to our library. But I'd like her to come here and see her son and husband engraved. I've heard marvelous things about the school and values and all of that, and I'm honored to be a part of the SFA family with that honorary degree. Thank you so much.
Presentation, and to have the President have an opportunity to respond. Then we'd like you to remain seated when the President and his party depart. So if you would do that at the end of this ceremony. I want to mention a couple of things to you. One, I hope you'll note in front of you that you have a souvenir program and also a souvenir pin. We certainly hope that you'll take those with you to remember this very, very significant day in Stephen F. Austin's history. The second thing I want to mention is on your way out, you'll be able to pick up a historic map of the SFA campus, and I hope each one of you will take that and enjoy that and have it with you. The third thing we want to do is to present a special gift to President Bush, and it's going to be hard for you to see from a distance, so I'm going to describe to you what he's going to be receiving. Let me describe that first and then invite him up to receive it. What is in this box is a Waterford crystal. And it's a new series that is dedicated to the American soldier. And it's dedicated to those people who have worked hard and achieved a securing peace for the greater good with valor, with bravery, and with honor. And we're going to present this crystal soldier to President Bush at this time.
I'm very pleased once again to be here, and I want to thank Mike Hinoco, the regent here, who shot me up here in his airplane. I forgot to mention him in the other room. But it's been an easy visit for me, and a wonderfully warm and emotional visit. Several of you all have, asked, well, what do you miss and what don't you miss about being president? And it's a hard subject. I've got 5 minutes here before the hook appears, and so I want to, but it's an understandable question, and I quoted Lyndon Johnson today saying that he found it hard to realize he'd actually been in the White House. Barbara is adjusting very well to the private life, and if I had ever gotten to be a big shot, she'd keep bringing me back to earth. I'll never forget when I received the marvelous honor. I was named a Knight Grand Cross of the Order of Bath, and that's the highest honor that the Queen can bestow on a foreigner. And I know why I got it. I got it because of the heroism of the sons of and daughters of SFA and every other family and every other institution that fought in Desert Storm. That's why I got it. And as kind of quasi-commander over the Desert Rats, her own Queen's own troops. And so I thought I'd have some fun with Barbara. And I got back to Houston in our little house there, me, Barb, 2 dogs. And I said, after the majesty of the White House, and I said, darling, how does it feel to be married to a real live knight? Make the coffee, damn it, Sir George. I miss our dealing with our military. I was blessed to have a marvelous Secretary of Defense, now a Dallas citizen, running Halliburton, Dick Cheney. I miss the military that I work with, from Colin Powell and Norm Schwartz, going right on down to the troops that I met when I went over to watch over the desert just before the battle started. And I have great respect for our all-volunteer Army. And I have great respect for the way they conducted that operation in the desert, which miraculously healed many of the wounds of Vietnam. I'm never quite sure I understood how, but in this war, in that war, Desert Storm, we knew what the beginning was. The beginning was to define the mission, and the mission was to end the aggression. And then we tried diplomacy, we tried to do it peacefully, we tried sanctions, we used the United Nations in a way that was designed to be used for, but could never be used for because of an automatic Soviet veto. But we circumvented that veto and China's reluctance. And when sanctions failed, we realized we had to fight. And mission defined, we politicians got out of the way and let the military fight and win the war, and then come home. And it was sanitary. It was people came together with respect for the military, who had been so unfairly downgraded. You know, some of our veterans, maybe a lot of sons and daughters of this school, come home, and instead of to acclaim by the people, they were spat upon and denied the honor that they deserve for having fought in that war. And so it healed the wounds of Vietnam, and that is one of the reasons that I miss the military. I don't miss the politics of Capitol Hill at all. That may come as a huge surprise to you, but I don't miss it. I think it's fair to say here that it's a lot easier when your party controls at least one house of the Congress, and I would have killed to have control of one, either the House or the Senate, for even a 2-year period. I didn't, so that I don't miss the politics of Capitol Hill, and I don't go up there. I miss the staff in the White House. Those people are civil servants. They make that home, they keep it as a majestic museum for the American people, and then they make it into a home for whatever family, regardless of politics, is privileged to live there. So I miss that at all. This may come as a huge surprise to you. I do not miss the national press. And they stood up and cheered. So I tried it in St. Louis 2 days later at one of these Peter Lowe seminars. Same marvelous reactions. I get back to Houston, I get a letter from a friend, this beneath you. You ought not to do this. Let somebody else attack them like that. I know it felt good, but don't do it. So I joined Press Bashers Anonymous. And I've been pure now for about 2 months and 7 days. To say that I don't need them, and on one serious note, one of the problems in attracting good people to public service is a lot of guys don't want to put their families through this intrusiveness, this suspicion, this adversarial relationship at the start that almost becomes too tense, too worrisome. Our son George has been wrestling obviously with this decision. The other day I gave a speech in Austin in the Capitol there with an author's thing that Laura has. A lot of authors, they filled the balconies and all, and I was there with Brent Scowcroft, because he and I had written a book called A World Transformed. I started answering questions, and up in the balcony, some guy, what about the 1.5 million Iraqi children you killed? Well, the Department of Public Service hauled his, what out of there. And then over here on the other side of the balcony, another guy starts screaming. It turned out to be a professor of journalism and a student of his, and they were, it was amateur night compared to what you go through with the president in terms of hostile demonstration. I walked out. I saw George was slouched in the front, my boy George, in the front row, and across from him was one of his twins, Jenna, and she was crying. And that night, George called me up. He said, I guess you saw Jenna weeping. And I said, I did. What was that about? He said, well, she came to me, and she said, if they can do that to my grandfather, embarrass him, just think what they'll do to you. Now, that has nothing to do with the press, but there is this kind of public adversarial attitude that one has to think about, especially for running for something as big as the presidency of the United States. My only advice to him and to my other son, Jim, is that it's worth it. And I meant what I said today, I hope that some of the people here in this school will consider public service. You don't have to run for president, but get involved and try to do something. So that's one of the things I say. I don't miss the press. I do miss the concept that using the bully pulpit for the idea of convincing the American people that public service is good and that all of us are blessed and that we ought to put something back, that we owe it to our country to do that. And I know just from a little homework that this is part of the mission of SFA, is to teach these bright, wonderful kids that are at this school that we really ought to put something back into this country that's given us all too much, the blessings for which we take for granted every single day of our lives. It's just clear to me. And I know Barbara and I do that, and we probably more than most should not do it, but we just fail to realize every day how lucky we are. I've enjoyed my visit here. It has been a wonderful, wonderful trip. Oh, I've got to tell you one other thing, and it's about George's family. Because I mentioned in there being in the big man in the grandchild business now, 14 grandchildren. But we are lucky in our family because George's twins know everything. They know absolutely everything. And last summer, we were up at Kennebunkport, Maine, and the kids came to visit us, and they're slouched down with their cousins and lying around watching some deadly TV thing. And I walked by, a very busy man. I had to go get my evening martini down at the other end of the house. And Jenna, we want to talk to you, Campy. Fine, what is it? We know this is true, but we want you to tell him, what is it, Jenna? She said, when you were head of CIA, weren't you? I said, yeah, I was, as a matter of fact. She said, what did you do with those people from outer space that you froze that came here? Where'd you put them? Well, just am I innocent, and I couldn't convince either of George's twins that it was, that I was telling the truth. Nevertheless, his family's doing well, the Bush family is doing well, and I will go home now and count my blessings for the joy I've had of being here. Thank you very much.